My mom kicked me out to impress her new husband. Then they stole my savings, threatened me, and I made them regret everything. I still remember the exact moment my mom told me I had to leave. Not because I had done something wrong. Not because I wasn't paying rent. Not even because we had a fight. No, I was being evicted because my mom wanted to impress her new husband. It all started when she met Greg. Greg was the kind of guy who wore cologne, so strong you could smell him before he entered a room. He had this wide, fake smile and a handshake that squeezed just a little too hard. From the moment he walked into our lives, it was clear he was the boss now, at least in his own mind. At first, I tried to be civil. I was 22, finishing up community college while working part-time at a bookstore. My plan was to move out eventually, but I wasn't exactly in a rush. My mom never minded before. She always said, "This house is your home, honey." But that changed the minute Greg moved in. The first sign was small. My room, which had always been my sanctuary, suddenly became that spare room. Greg started making comments about how it would make a great home gym or office. My posters were too childish. My books were clutter. And my presence? Well, that was just temporary. Then came the rules. Household meetings became a regular thing, and Greg took charge like he was the CEO of some corporation instead of a guy who had moved in 2 months ago. One night, he called me into the living room, arms crossed like a disappointed father. My mom sat next to him, looking at her hands. "We've been talking," Greg began, like he and my mom were some kind of united front. "It's time for you to spread your wings, kid. Be independent. Find your own place." I blinked. "Are you kicking me out?" Mom flinched at the word kicking, but she didn't correct me. "We just think it's best," she said weakly. Greg leaned back, arms behind his head. "It's not personal, bud. Every young man needs to stand on his own 2 feet. But stand on my own 2 feet? The guy who didn't even own the house was telling me I had to go? I wanted to argue, to remind my mom that I had always paid for my own food, done my share of chores, and never asked for a dime. But the look in her eyes told me it wouldn't matter. She had already made her choice. I had 2 weeks to find a place. 2 weeks to turn my life upside down because my mom wanted to play house with her new husband. But if they thought I was just going to roll over and disappear, they were about to be very, very wrong. The first few days after that conversation felt surreal. I kept expecting my mom to change her mind, to knock on my door and tell me it was all a big mistake. That never happened. Instead, Greg started bringing home boxes. "For your stuff," he said, grinning like he was doing me a favor. I knew I had to act fast. I didn't have much in savings, but I refused to beg my mom for help. If she wanted to side with Greg, fine. I'd figure things out on my own. I spent every spare moment looking for a place, but rent was insane. I had enough for a deposit on a tiny, rundown studio apartment in the bad part of town, but I wasn't sure I could afford it long term. My bookstore job barely covered gas and food, let alone rent. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from my old friend Jake. "Hey, Mun, you still looking for a place? My roommate bailed. Need someone to split rent ASAP. Cheap." I didn't hesitate. I called him right away. "When can I move in?" "Tomorrow if you want. It's nothing fancy, but it's better than being homeless." That was all I needed to hear. The next morning, I started packing. Greg watched me with a smug smile, clearly satisfied with himself. My mom hovered in the background, silent. She didn't stop me. She didn't say goodbye. By noon, I was gone. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. At first, things were okay. Jake's apartment was small, but at least I had a roof over my head. We stayed up late playing video games, eating cheap takeout, and complaining about life. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like freedom. Then a week after I moved in, I got a text from my mom. "Hope you're settling in okay. Greg says you still have some stuff in the garage. You need to come get it by Friday." I stared at my phone. That was it? "No, I miss you. No, how are you?" Just Greg's orders being relayed through her. I should have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. What exactly was left in the garage? When I showed up at the house, Greg was waiting outside with a box in his hands. He thrust it at me like he was doing charity work. "Here you go, bud. Don't want to keep this stuff around forever." I looked inside. A few old shirts, some notebooks, and a mug I had bought my mom for her birthday years ago. It stung, but before I could leave, something caught my eye, a folder sitting on the workbench. It had my name on it. When I picked it up, Greg's expression changed for the first time. He looked nervous. "That's just some old paperwork," he said quickly. "Nothing important." I opened it. Inside were bank statements. My mom's, but with withdrawals made in my name. Thousands of dollars. Gone over the last few months. My stomach dropped. "What is this?" Greg's face twisted into a fake smile. "Your mom took out a little extra to help with the house. No big deal." No big deal? She had been draining my savings without my knowledge. And Greg had been the one benefiting from it. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about getting kicked out anymore. This was theft, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I left that garage fuming, gripping the folder so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mom had drained my savings. Thousands of dollars gone without so much as a conversation. Worse yet, Greg had been the one benefiting from it. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was theft. I drove back to Jake's place, my mind racing. I needed a plan. My first instinct was to confront my mom directly, demand an explanation, but deep down, I knew it would get me nowhere. She had already chosen Greg over me. Instead, I needed to be smart. If they thought I would let this go, they were in for a surprise. That night, I spread out the bank statements across Jake's kitchen table. He whistled low, shaking his head. "Dude, this is messed up. You gotta do something about this." I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "Yeah, but what? I can't exactly call the cops on my own mom." Jake leaned back in his chair, thinking. "You need proof that she actually took the money. It's all in her account, right? But did she sign anything in your name?" I hesitated, flipping through the papers again. Then I saw it, my signature, or rather a horrible attempt at forging it. Greg must have thought he was being clever, but the sloppy handwriting was a dead giveaway. I felt a surge of anger so strong I had to steady my breathing. "This is it," I muttered. "I can use this." Over the next few days, I did my research. I spoke to a friend who worked at a bank, who confirmed that forged documents could be grounds for legal action. I also reached out to a lawyer, who told me I had a case if I wanted to pursue it. But the most interesting development came when I decided to pay a visit to my mom's work. She was a receptionist at a small dental office. I showed up unannounced, catching her completely off guard. When she saw me, her face turned pale. "Sweetheart," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" I pulled out the folder, placing it on the counter between us. "We need to talk." She glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. "Not here. Let's go outside." We stepped into the parking lot, where I wasted no time. "You stole from me," I said flatly. "Don't bother denying it. I have proof." Tears welled in her eyes. "It's not what you think. Greg said it was just a temporary loan. We were struggling with the house payments." "A loan?" I scoffed. "That's funny because I don't remember agreeing to it." "And Greg? You let him convince you to steal from your own son." She covered her mouth, shaking her head. "I was going to pay you back." I folded my arms. "With what money?" "Because last I checked, Greg doesn't have a job." She flinched, confirming what I already knew. Greg had been mooching off her, just like he had mooched off me. I could see the guilt written all over her face, but at that moment, I didn't care. "I could press charges," I continued. "Forgery is a crime, Mom." Her eyes widened. "You wouldn't." I let the silence stretch. Would I? I wasn't sure myself. But I needed her to believe I would. I needed her to see just how badly she had screwed up. After a long pause, she let out a shaky breath. "What do you want?" I already had my answer. "I want my money back. All of it. And I want Greg out of your house." She hesitated, chewing her lip. No excuses. I cut in. "I'm giving you a chance to make this right. But if you don't, I won't hesitate to take this to court." The next few days were tense. I didn't hear from her at first, but then, little by little, the money started appearing in my account. She must have sold some of Greg's things, because I couldn't imagine where else she got the cash. And Greg? Well, let's just say he wasn't happy when he found out. According to my cousin, who still lived in the neighborhood, Greg packed up and left after a massive fight. Apparently, my mom had finally seen through his act. I won, but it didn't feel like a victory. I got my money back, sure. But I lost something bigger, the trust one once had in my mom. That's something I don't think I'll ever get back. The aftermath was quiet, too quiet. My mom tried to reach out a few times, but I ignored her calls. I needed space. I needed time. I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. Then one night, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Greg standing there, his eyes dark with anger. "We need to talk," he growled. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. "There's nothing left to talk about, Greg." "Oh, I think there is," he said, stepping forward. "You ruined my life." I crossed my arms. "You did that yourself." Greg scoffed. "You think you won? You think you're some kind of hero? You turned your mother against me. She saw you for what you are." I shot back. "A parasite." His face twisted in rage. "You don't know who you're messing with, kid." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I think I do." A washed-up loser with nowhere left to go. Greg lunged, grabbing my shirt. I reacted without thinking, shoving him back so hard he stumbled down the steps. He landed on the pavement with a grunt, glaring up at me. "This isn't over," he hissed. I stared down at him, heart pounding. "Yeah, Greg, it is." I turned and walked inside, locking the door behind me. I knew, in that moment, I would never see him again, and I was perfectly fine with that. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself adjusting to a new kind of normal. No more looking over my shoulder, no more worrying about Greg showing up at my door. I finally felt free. But then, one evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You think you're safe? Think again." My stomach dropped. Greg might have been gone from my life physically, but he clearly wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I found a slashed tire on my car. A chill ran down my spine. Greg wasn't just sending threats. He was acting on them. And that meant I had to be ready for whatever was coming next. I installed security cameras around my apartment, double-checked the locks, and even started carrying pepper spray. But paranoia crept into my bones. Every shadow on the street felt like him. Every noise outside my window made me jump. The police weren't much help. They took my report, but without concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Then one night, I caught a figure lurking near my car on the security footage. It was Greg. He was back. I knew then that I couldn't just sit and wait for him to strike. I had to take control of the situation, and that meant playing offense, not defense. Greg had underestimated me before. This time I was ready. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and planning. I knew Greg wasn't going to stop. The slashed tire was just a warning, and the cryptic message had all but confirmed it. He was playing a game, and I needed to be ready for his next move. I installed security cameras, reinforced my doors, and even started keeping a knife under my pillow at night. Sleep became a luxury. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow outside my window sent my heart into overdrive. Greg had already proven he was willing to escalate. The question was, how far would he go? Then, late one night, the inevitable happened. A loud bang shattered the silence, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. My heart pounded as I grabbed the baseball bat I had started keeping by my bed. I crept to the window, peeking through the blinds. A shadowy figure stood near the side of my building, moving toward the back door. "Greg." My pulse roared in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and the situation to the operator. Then, gripping the bat tightly, I moved to the back door and waited. I could hear him fiddling with the lock, muttering under his breath. Seconds felt like hours. Then, just as the lock clicked open, red and blue lights flooded the street. Greg cursed and turned to run, but it was too late. The police were already on him. 2 officers tackled him to the ground as he thrashed and yelled. One of the officers approached me. "You all right?" I nodded, my hands still shaking. "Yeah, I think it's finally over." Greg was hauled away in handcuffs, screaming about how I had ruined his life. I watched as they shoved him into the back of the patrol car, a wave of relief washing over me. For the first time in months, I felt safe. But I also knew this wasn't just about Greg anymore. This was about my mom, about what she had let happen. And now, it was time to confront her once and for all. And this time, I wasn't going to let her hide behind excuses. The confrontation with Greg was over, but there was one last piece of unfinished business: my mom. I had been putting it off, hesitant to face her again, but I knew I had to. There were too many unanswered questions. Too much left unspoken. The day after Greg's arrest, I drove back to my childhood home. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel like home anymore. I knocked on the door, half expecting Greg to answer out of habit, but it was my mom. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked smaller, somehow, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her shoulders. She stepped aside, letting me in without a word. I walked into the living room, noting how quiet the house was without Greg's overbearing presence. The space felt hollow, like something vital was missing. "I know why you're here," she said softly, sinking onto the couch. "And you have every right to be angry." I stayed standing. "Why, Mom? Why did you let him do all of this? Why did you choose him over me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, as if ashamed. "I was scared. I thought I needed him. I didn't realize how much I was losing until it was too late." I let her words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to tell her it was okay, but it wasn't. "Not yet. He stole from me. You stole from me," I said, my voice raw. "You let him ruin my life." "I know," she whispered. "I'll never forgive myself for that." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, she reached into the side table and pulled out an envelope. "I've been saving up. It's not everything, but it's a start. I want to make things right." I took the envelope but didn't open it. Instead, I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw the regret written all over her face. Maybe she truly was sorry. Maybe she wasn't. "I don't know if we can ever fix this," I admitted. She nodded, her voice trembling. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying." I didn't have an answer for that, so I just turned and walked out the door, knowing that some wounds take longer to heal than others. The days following my final conversation with my mom were a whirlwind of emotions. I should have felt relief, but instead, I was restless, as if something unfinished loomed over me. Jake insisted we go out, take a breather. We hit a bar, hoping to let loose, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound, every shadow, made me jumpy. I downed my drinks faster than usual, hoping they would dull my nerves. They didn't. When I stumbled home that night, something was off. A strange stillness hung in the air, an unnatural quiet. Then I saw it. An envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Just my name, scrawled in thick black ink. My pulse pounded as I ripped it open. Inside was a single slip of paper. "You think this is over?" "It's not." I stumbled back, my stomach twisting. The handwriting was unmistakable. Greg. He was in jail. He shouldn't have been able to reach me. And yet, here was proof that he still could. That he still was. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch. A new text message. Blocked number. "See you soon." A chill crawled up my spine. I turned, checking the locks on my door, double and triple checking them. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. This was a game, and Greg was making his move. But I wasn't going to play defense anymore. It was time to turn the tables. The next morning, I called the detective handling Greg's case. If he thought he could intimidate me from behind bars, he had another thing coming. This wasn't just about fear anymore. This was war. After my call with the detective, I waited. Days passed, each one stretching longer than the last. I tried to keep busy, but Greg's threats hung over me like a storm cloud. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. Every knock at the door sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. Then, just as I was starting to think maybe Greg had given up, I got another message. Blocked number. You have no idea what's coming. I clenched my jaw, staring at the words until they blurred together. Enough was enough. I wasn't going to live in fear. I called Jake and filled him in. "I think he's got someone on the outside helping him," I said. "There's no way he could be doing this alone." Jake agreed. "Then we need to find out who. If he has people willing to mess with you while he's locked up, that means he still has leverage." That night, we set up a trap. Jake parked his car a block away, hidden from view, while I waited inside my apartment, watching the security feed. If someone was going to come for me, I'd be ready. Hours passed. Then, just after midnight movement, a shadow flitted past my window. My pulse spiked. I reached for the bat beside me, gripping it tightly. Whoever was out there, they were getting bolder. Then a knock. Slow. Deliberate. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. Who is it? Silence. Then another knock. I glanced at my phone. Jake was already on his way. Time to end this. My heart pounded as I reached for the door handle, ready for whatever, or whoever, was on the other side. The knock at the door sent a chill down my spine. I tightened my grip on the bat, my palms slick with sweat. My breath was steady, but my heart was hammering. Whoever was outside wasn't here for a friendly visit. I checked the peephole. A shadowy figure stood on the other side, hood up, hands in pockets. Jake's voice came through my earpiece. I see him. Stay put. I ignored him. I twisted the lock and yanked the door open, bat raised. Who the hell are you? The guy took a slow step back, his face partially obscured by the dim hallway light. Then he smirked. You made a mistake messing with Greg. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed him by the front of his hoodie and shoved him against the wall. You're the one making mistakes showing up here. He laughed, his breath reeking of cigarettes. You think this is over? I pressed the bat against his chest. You're going to tell me exactly who sent you, or I start swinging. Jake burst into the hallway, gun drawn. Step away. The guy paled. Whoa, all right. Greg's got friends. Guys inside and outside. You think a little jail time means anything? I let go of his hoodie, shoving him toward Jake. Then sent a message back. If Greg keeps coming, I won't call the cops next time. I'll handle it myself. The guy scurried off, nearly tripping over his own feet. Jake kept his gun raised until he disappeared down the stairwell. I exhaled. This isn't over. Jake nodded. No, but now we take the fight to him. And this time, I was making sure Greg would regret every single decision that led him here. I wasn't the scared, helpless guy he had kicked out months ago. This time, I was ready for war. The aftermath of everything felt surreal. Greg was done. The threat stopped. His so-called friends disappeared into the shadows, and my mom, well, she tried to mend things, but some wounds cut too deep. I didn't hate her, not anymore, but I couldn't forget what she had done. Jake and I sat on the hood of his car one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. So what now? He asked, tossing me a beer. I cracked it open and took a sip, letting the cold bitterness settle in my throat. I don't know, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I get to decide. Jake nodded. That's gotta feel good. I exhaled, staring at the skyline. Yeah, it really does. The road ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but it was mine, and that was enough. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments. I found a new place, a small but comfortable apartment downtown. I got a promotion at work. I started seeing a therapist, working through the anger, the betrayal, the pain that Greg and my mother had left me with. And slowly, I started healing. One day, I got a letter from my mom. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside a simple note. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope one day you'll let me try to make things right. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I wasn't ready yet. Maybe one day, but not now. For now, I was focused on moving forward, on living my life on my own terms. And that was the best revenge of all.